up or that numbing depression sets in. And then all of a sudden, James's words here can feel out of touch with reality. It can feel like that's a nice sentiment, James, but you don't actually know. But I want to suggest that when we think that way, when we chalk up James's words here as kind of unattainable, like overly utopian ideas, we are imposing a very modern, very American reading on this ancient text. Timothy Keller, in his book, Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering, he observes that the Americans are more traumatized by grief and pain than other cultures because one of our core creeds is the pursuit of happiness. We expect happiness. We assume that our lot in life is to be pain-free. We are indoctrinated from birth to believe that we will always be able to pay the bills. No one we love will die until they're really old and they've lived a long and happy life. And that if we work hard enough, our dreams can truly be achieved. Our expectations for abuse and depression and anxiety and grief and pain are that they will be a rare phenomenon in our life. And because of this, we have not formulated a worldview that has room for suffering. But keep in mind who is writing this letter and who he is writing this letter to. This is James. This is the little brother of Jesus. This is the guy who saw Jesus tortured and suffering on a cross. And he is the leader of the Jerusalem church. He starts this letter off by saying he's writing to scattered churches. Why are they scattered? Because a persecution was in full swing. They were one centralized church, and then persecution started happening. And the only way that the church and the movement of Jesus can continue is if they dispersed and they left. These are people who saw their loved ones tortured, killed, and imprisoned because of their faith. These are people who had to leave their families and their homes and their jobs in order to stay alive. These are people who understood true pain and true suffering. This is not an instruction by James to look on the bright side. This is not James just telling them like to ignore their pain and find something to distract themselves from it. These words are not cheap cliches where James is just trying to cheer up his readers. These words are heavy and burdened with experience. He knows what he's talking about when he says to take all of your trials and put it in the prophet's column and count it as joy. So consider it pure joy when. Notice it's not if you face trials of many kinds, it's when you face trials of many kinds. In our culture, it can seem inconceivable to allow for pain and joy to coexist, but for James, this was his only option. He didn't have the option. If he didn't choose to experience joy alongside his pain, he just wasn't going to experience joy because pain was an everyday phenomenon for James. M. Scott Peck, the renowned Christian psychologist, he once wrote, "If you expect life to be easy, you will find it unbearably hard. If you expect life to be hard, you will be surprised by how much joy and beauty it has to offer." So count it all joy when you face trials of many kinds. So this word face can also mean meet, when you meet trials of many kinds, but it can also mean the word like to fall or trip into trials of many kinds. So we don't plan for pain, right? We fall into pain, we trip into pain. The word trials here is also translated elsewhere as suffering or disaster or, get this, plague. So anyone who has felt the impact of COVID sees the power of this Greek word, which can be translated as when you face trials of many kinds or plagues of many kinds. Verse 3, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. You know that the Greeks had multiple categories of knowing. So there's like a form of knowing where it's like, I know 2 + 2 = 4. But then there's like a deeper, more relational way of knowing. This is like the type of knowing like, I know that if my wife and I have to be somewhere on time, it's probably not going to happen. Like it's one of those things where like when you know somebody on a deep level, like the years of experience have built up enough knowledge where you know that person. So count all of your joy as sufferings because you know on a relational, experiential level, you know who this God is. You know who the author and perfecter of your faith is. You know, you have seen what this God has done before. You can count it as joy because in your bones, you know. Through years of experience, relationship with God, or maybe not years of experience, maybe you're new to this, but you've had the encounters with this God and you know. You can count it all joy. And testing because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Testing is not like a math test. This is more like, so my favorite car is a Toyota 4Runner. Anybody, any Toyota 4Runner fans in here? Like, just me? Oh my gosh, you guys, I love Toyota 4Runners. They're a spicy vehicle. I love them. But like, this Toyota 4Runners, like the way they work is like, whenever Toyota releases a new model of their 4Runner, like they make all these claims about what the car can do and what can it withstand and like what types of conditions it's going to take for the car to be ineffective. So they make all these claims and then they give the car to a test driver. And the test driver will take it off-roading and they will just drive the crud out of it. They'll see how fast they can take it. They'll slam on the brakes. They'll flip it. They'll roll it. They'll do everything they can to see if this vehicle actually has the capacity to do what its maker says it can do. What field testing is to off-road vehicles, trials are to followers of Jesus. Pain is the place where we are proven to the world, where we are proven who we are, that we actually have the capacity to do what our Maker says we can do. Because you know that the testing of your faith, we've talked about this before. The Greek word for faith is different than the word belief. In our culture, we kind of conflate belief and faith to mean the same thing, but faith in the Greek actually means allegiance or faithfulness or fidelity. Belief has to do with trust and surrender to God. Faith has to do with how long we can do that while remaining faithful in the face of trials. Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Perseverance can be steadfastness or endurance. It can also be to remain or to stay. This is the kind of testing that gives the ability to stay faithful and steadfast when everything around you is shaking. This is emotional resilience, the ability to live and love and experience joy when your circumstances feel like they're conspiring against you. But this passage also carries with it echoes of hope. We aren't just persevering for the sake of persevering. We're persevering because we know that God is accomplishing an end through the pain that we experience. We know that when we are on the other side of persevering, we will be aids to God in advancing his kingdom to this world. In his seminal book, Surprised by Hope, N.T. Wright says, "Hope is about the future, but it is for the present. It is the expectation of coming good based off of the promises of God. The nature of hope offers a kind of energy to live well here and now." This joy that James writes about is rooted in hope. This is what trials have the potential to produce in us, a hopefulness in spite of circumstances and a persistence when it comes to joy. Verse 4, "Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature. I love the way Eugene Peterson translates this in a message. He says, "Do not try to get out of anything prematurely," as in before maturity. The Greek word here for finish and mature, it's the same Greek word. It's the word telos. Everybody say telos. Telos is the idea it captures of the end goal of a thing. It's the long range like vision of a thing, and it's something that's brought to completion. So the Greek word here, so he's actually saying, let perseverance telos you so that you may be telos. Let perseverance mature you so that you may be mature. And the telos, the end goal of a disciple of Jesus, is maturity into Christ's likeness. Amen? That's the end goal of our lives. This is becoming like God through union with God. We are complete when, like Jesus, the inner life of the Trinity is just flowing so deeply within us that it then flows out into the rest of the world. Let perseverance finish its work in you so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. You may be complete or whole. The idea is that before the suffering came and before the endurance had to come, you did not have what you needed to have to live in God's kingdom. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may then be complete. We have matured, so the idea is that after it's finished its work, we have matured into Christ's likeness. We've reached the end goal of our lives and we are finally whole. But the truth is we do not think our way into maturity and we do not feel our way into maturity. We persevere our way into maturity. Everybody say we persevere our way into maturity. It doesn't just, you can't read, you can read all the books in the world and you're not going to find maturity. You can feel all the feels in the world and you're not going to find maturity. That only comes in the face of suffering. In these 4 verses, James is offering a profound and redemptive perspective on pain. And he is able to do this because he has a clear vision of what the end goal is going to be on the other side of pain. But in our world, the most important thing, the end goal in our world, the thing that we move heaven and earth to achieve is not love or generosity or justice or goodness. The thing that in our world that we are constantly told is most important is happiness. We live in a world where it is more important to feel good than to be good. Happiness has become the meaning of life. And I have to be honest with you, I am easily swayed by this agenda. Who doesn't love happiness? I love being happy. And when I feel like my happiness is threatened, I keep moving this stand, I'm sorry, Jeff. When I feel like my happiness is threatened, I go into full fight mode. I get pretty aggressive and intense because I value my happiness. But if happiness is the meaning of life, then there is no redemptive perspective to be had when suffering comes. Because suffering derails your meaning. If happiness or control or security or pleasure, if any of these things are the most important thing in your life, when suffering comes, it derails the very core of your life. And you just have no idea how to live in this world anymore. But if the most important thing of your life, if the end goal of your life is maturity into Christ's likeness, then when suffering comes, you can actually count it as joy. You can actually see that and say, something's happening here, and I hate it, but something's happening inside of me where I'm going to become the type of person I was always meant to be on the other side of this. The beauty of Advent, of remembering when joy came to the world and looking forward to joy, is that we can see that it is not foolish to count our sufferings as joy. When we have a vision for Christ coming back, we can see that it is not foolish. When our end goal is maturity into Christ's likeness, when our desires are reordered so that we can actually live and thrive in God's coming kingdom, joy coinciding with suffering makes all the sense in the world. It's not foolish. So I want to end with 3 observations. The first is that God has a corresponding joy for every trial we face. God has a corresponding joy for every trial we face. When you are facing grief and pain, it feels like you have been robbed of something, right? Raise your hand if you feel that way. When you've grieved, you feel like something's been stolen from you. And the truth is, it has been. Because God designed us to live in a world where our joy would not be compromised, where we would live and walk with intimacy with him forever. But we live in a world that is marked and stained by sin and death, and so abiding joy just doesn't come easy. But hear me when I say this, and please hear this. God is at work to give you more than what you've lost. God is at work to give you more than what you've lost. Fyodor Dostoevsky, he's one of the great writers in all of fiction history. He's renowned all over the world. And like C.S. Lewis, his work is layered with Christian allegory. And he grew up in the Eastern Orthodox Church, but when he got to high school, he was introduced to Enlightenment philosophers, and he became an atheist. After high school, he joined an underground group of writers who would publish anonymously these writings that were deeply critical of Russia's Tsar at the time. And eventually he was found out and he was arrested. And he was sentenced to 8 years at a work camp, in a freezing Siberian work camp, where it was winter all year long. And upon entering the camp, a woman handed this atheist a copy of the 4 Gospels. And with nothing else to read for 8 years, all he read were the biographies of Jesus. And he talks about how in his deepest agony, he read the Gospels and he discovered true joy. And he said it's not a joy that erased the agony of the frostbite or slave labor, but it was a joy that dug deeper into a soul than the agony could touch. Imagine that, a joy deeper than any pain can actually touch. He said that this joy was his strength. And then later he would write, "Man is fond of counting his troubles, but he does not count his joys. If he counted them as he ought to, he would see that every lot has enough happiness provided for it." Every season of pain has enough happiness provided for that season. So take heart in this. When joy feels completely inaccessible, God is at work to give you more than what you've lost. And when you align your heart with God, you will see how he recycles your pain into joy. Number 2, Advent joy is rooted in hope for Christ's return, where every tear will be wiped away. And this, of course, is an allusion to Revelation 21:4, where Christ talks about how when Christ comes back, he will wipe away every tear from our eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old things of this world have passed away. I love that. The old order of things has passed away. No matter how much it may seem like this world is conspiring against our joy, no matter how painful the present moment may seem, we look to a day where sorrow is a distant memory, where all brokenness is healed, where all that is ugly is made beautiful, all that is stolen will be restored. I'm such a stereotypical youth pastor because my favorite band is Switchfoot. Have you guys ever heard of the band Switchfoot? If you've ever met a youth pastor, you've met someone who loves Switchfoot. But their lyrics just speak to me. And in their song Restless, John Foreman, the songwriter, he talks about his just restless pursuit of God's presence and how no matter what he does or where he looks, he just can't seem to find an intimacy with God that he used to have. But he ends the song with, it's just beautiful. This is how he ends the song, with a vision of what it will be like when he's no longer restless for the presence of God. He says, "Until that sea of glass we meet, at last completed and complete, the tide of tears and pain subsides, and laughter drinks them dry." I love that. The tide of tears and pain subsides and laughter drinks them dry. I will be waiting, anticipating all that I aim for, what I was made for. With every heartbeat, all of my blood bleeds, running inside me, looking for you. We look forward in joy because when Christ comes again, laughter will drink dry all of our tears and pain. And lastly, circumstances and our world did not give us this Advent joy, and they cannot take it away either. Circumstances and our world did not give us this Advent joy, and they cannot take it away either. The joy that comes through communion with the Spirit is not a joy that erases pain. The joy that comes through communion with the Spirit is not a joy that replaces pain. It is a joy that coincides with pain. It coexists next to pain. God is not going, listen, this is important because I hate this, but this is true. God is not going to do us the disservice of giving us a pain-free life. If he did that, that would be a massive disservice to us because pain is the tool that brings us to completion. Listen to this quote by Dallas Willard, and listen to this carefully because he so hits home what I'm talking about here. He says, "It's only in the heat of pain and suffering, both mental and physical, that real human character is forged. One does not develop courage without facing danger, patience without trials, wisdom without brain-wrecking puzzles, endurance without suffering, or honesty without temptations. These are the very things we treasure most in people. So ask yourself if you would be willing to be devoid of all of these virtues, if you would be willing to have these virtues taken away from you. And if your answer is no, I'll keep my endurance, I'll keep my honesty, I'll keep my integrity, then do not scorn the means of obtaining them. Do not resent the suffering that brought you those things." Advent joy is not given to us based off of the phase of life we're in. It's not based off of our successes or failures. It's not based off of whether or not all is well in our world. Advent joy is only possible with the perspective that Jesus can take all of this mess and he can recycle it into something beautiful and good. He can actually take this mess and he can use it to turn you into the type of person we all need to be. And if you know that the ugliness you endure now can contribute to the beauty later in the world, then you can actually suffer with a little bit of joy in your heart. Kelsey and I were decorating our house for Christmas a couple nights ago, and we have this little signboard where you kind of put the little letters. You know what I'm talking about? Put the letters in the sign, you hang it on the wall, and it says whatever. I don't know. Anyways, Kelsey told me to put something on there, and I felt a lot of pressure because sometimes I say stupid stuff. But as I was putting it on there, I could only think of one phrase that I was supposed to put on there, and it's from the hymn, "O Holy Night," and it was, "The weary world rejoices." When Jesus first came, the first Advent, all was not right in the world. Mary and Joseph would bear incomprehensible shame because she carried a child out of wedlock, and he stayed with her. Israel was severely oppressed by the Roman Empire, and they were not the triumphant kingdom they thought they were promised to be. It was a season of profound disappointment for the nation as a whole. The voice and the promises of God seemed like a distant memory. And Herod would decree the murder of every Israelite boy 2 years old and younger. Jesus wasn't exactly born in ideal circumstances. And yet, in spite of all of that, when he came, the weary world rejoiced. And I needed to put that on the sign in my living room because I needed to know that no matter how painful things might seem this Christmas, and no matter how much it might feel like things are disappointing and life did not play out the way that we intended life to play out, the weary world can still rejoice because of the coming of Christ. Amen? Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for your promise of joy. Thank you so much that this is something that is not circumstantial. It's something that can be accessed and discovered regardless of what we're going through. And God, I think we get lost because we think if I'm experiencing joy, I can't possibly also experience pain. But God, I think those categories are categories that the scriptures reject. I don't think that's how you designed us to be. And so, God, for those of us who are here in heartbreak and those of us who are here and Christmas just doesn't feel very cheery to them, God, I ask that they would sense your coinciding, coexisting joy. And God, just like Dostoevsky, that we would sense that the joy from you runs deeper than frostbite or agony could touch. We love you, Jesus, and we trust you with these things in your name. Amen. All right, Merry Christmas, church. We'll see you guys next week.